Posted by you/Royal. Ad 1555. What is the scariest thing you witnessed with your own eyes? When I was around 6, we were going to my grandparents' house. On the interstate, a woman seemed to fall out of a car in front of us. My dad had to swerve to avoid hitting her. That's all I saw with my own eyes. It turned out the woman's husband was trying to murder her and make it look like a suicide. The intention was for my dad to have run her over, but he has time to swerve. The husband had an accomplice behind us, but he couldn't hit her because of how my dad swerved. Some other good Samaritan stopped and gave the woman a ride to the hospital. The guy who gave her a ride and my dad were both called as witnesses at the trial. The husband and the accomplice were both convicted for conspiracy for attempted murder. My dad smashing a man's leg bones with a tire iron, then other things. Backstory: my dad isn't a big man. 5'6", 140 pounds or so. But my dad grew up tough and mean as fuck. Joined a local biker gang after the Navy kicked him out. We lived in this tiny house on the east side of Cleveland, rented to us by this fucking sleazeball. My parents are young, had me at 16, I was 6 when the landlord broke into our house and was going through my mom's underwear drawer. He had a thing for her, and kept trying shit. My dad is working as a mechanic at the time and is on his way home. Dude's sitting there trying to come onto my mom. Dad walks in, sees the score. What commences is a Looney Tunes escape-style chase through the house, my dad wielding a tire iron over his head silently closing in on this dude. Dude runs out of room, turns to fight, my dad gets him on the head first, then he blocks with his arm, bring his wrist. Guy falls down, dad just kept going to work on him, smashed his kneecap and the 2 shin bones. Would have killed him if mom didn't scream. Dad got felony assault and 3 years. His friends kept my mom safe from our landlord for that time, even paid our rent once in a while. For me, it was a Christmas day I'll never forget. I was at my girlfriend's parents' place, blissfully sleeping and excited for the first Christmas in a long time where it finally felt like I was home. My mother died tragically and unexpectedly when I was younger, and I never really felt like I had a true family again until this point. Then, at 3 a.m., unprovoked, my girlfriend's older sister comes into her bedroom where my girlfriend and I are sleeping. The sister starts incoherently rambling and stops and pulls the large kitchen knife from behind her back. For the record, her sister is a diagnosed schizophrenic, and she had been having quite a good period before this event occurred. At this point I am wide awake, nearly paralyzed in fear of what's going to happen next. Except it's not what I expected. She then takes the knife and turns it on herself, and proceeds to carve a giant gash from her ankle to her knee. My girlfriend managed to call 911 while I managed to talk her sister into putting the knife down and coming with me to the bathroom to tend to her, now profusely bleeding, wound. We managed to get her sister stabilized emotionally before the cops showed up, and I drove my girlfriend's mom to the hospital sometime before 4 a.m., and we spent the better part of the morning at the hospital until she was sedated and supervised. Everyone at the house was shell-shocked, so when we got home, there was still cleanup to do, as there was quite a mess made. Nothing says Merry Christmas like cleaning dried pools of blood of a hardwood floor. That was when I noped out of celebrating holidays. I also watched my mother pass away due to a heart attack/aneurysm/stroke 5 minutes before she was about to renew her vows, so weddings are also a no-go for me too. My buddy and I were walking out in the woods in Oklahoma. Saw what looked like a hooded man crouching down next to the creek bed at the bottom of a hill on the other side of the creek from us. We were pretty deep in the woods, we hiked out there pretty often and never saw anyone else. Well, the thing/dude looks up at us, then turns tail and bolts up the hill way faster than any human should be capable of. Took mere seconds on a hill that would have taken us at least 5 to 10 minutes as we were in the brush that is not super easy to traverse through. My buddy and I noped the fuck out of there straight home where we explained what we saw to my friend's mom. I know it sounds like this was probably nothing, but if you could only see how it moved. Still have no explanation of what we saw to this day. I asked my friend about it later on in our adult life and he remembered the encounter as well, and we are both still a bit disturbed by it. I was 13 spending the night at my neighborhood friend's house. Her bed was up against the wall below the window, which was near this big tree we used to climb during the summer. It was about 2 in the morning and after some late night giggles we started drifting off to sleep. We woke up to a huge bang which shook the window and the bed frame. We looked outside and started screaming. Someone had crashed their car into the tree. It was super dark out so I couldn't see anything but the car wrapped around the tree. Her parents came in and we had to go sleep in the living room. I couldn't sleep. The next morning my adopted mom calls and tells me to come home. Turns out the person who crashed was my brother. I guess my adopted brother confessed his love to one of his close guy friends, got rejected, got drunk and tried to kill himself by crashing into that tree. He turned out okay thankfully, but the thought of I could have heard my brother's death stuck with me. Around 16, my other adopted brother, A, started hearing voices. He was convinced people were under the house planning to kill him. It started off with him putting his ear to the floor and asking me and my other siblings if we could hear them and to record it. Me being young, I recorded it for him, but it was just silence. He kept asking me to rewind the video over and over, asking me if I heard it too. My other brother, Jay, told my adopted mom, but she shrugged it off. It went on like this for about 2 days. I knew it was bad, but nothing prepared me for what was about to happen. One night I saw A frantically packing his bags and asked where he was going. He replied his friend, K, was there to pick him up. Well, K was actually out of state with her family. I woke my mom up and we found A sitting in my other brother, P.'s car in the passenger seat with a pile of clothes in his lap, just staring out the windshield with his mouth open. My mom tried to convince him that K was out of state and that he was in P.'s car, and it took us about an hour to get him inside. He seemed okay until the next night. He ended up taking all the knives from the kitchen and lining them up in the bathroom before running out the door. I ran after him barefoot, but he was too fast. I remember crying in the middle of the street. I remember yelling at my mom to help him because she was just standing there doing nothing. Apparently he was jumping the neighbors' fences and running in people's backyards. I went back inside and collapsed on my bed sobbing. I remember my mom on the phone with the police begging them not to shoot him. I remember sobbing even harder, thinking my brother was going to die, begging whatever holy that they wouldn't kill my brother. He ended up going to an inpatient psych where they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. He's on medication that helps and he's doing good now. He doesn't remember anything that happened, but I do. I had a really fucked up childhood, and I could go on about all the messed up things I've seen, from growing up with an addict mom, to foster care, etc. But I am healing from all my traumas now. I'm in therapy and finally found medication that works for my BPD and PTSD. Mental illness is no joke. Mental illness can be terrifying. I thank God my kids don't know that life. Dad's doing good now, out of the gang but still rides. He's mellowed in his 50s. Good grandpa, honestly. When I was a kid, I witnessed my drunk stepfather wielding a loaded shotgun with the safety off. It was pointed inches from the face of my dog, and he threatened to blow her head off right then and there. Fortunately, he didn't shoot her in front of me. Bad news is that she ran away, leaving her collar and tags behind, a few days later. I was only 8 or 9 at the time, so I stood no chance against him. Thankfully, and to nobody's surprise, he died due to liver failure after decades of drug and alcohol abuse. Was home alone as a teenager, during an aggravated burglary. Heard something slamming into front door. Went to go open it. And realized I had locked the wire screen door. So it seemed odd they were knocking so hard directly onto the wooden door. Instead, looked out the window and to the side to see a heavy man that I did not recognize. I yelled out, "What did he want?" No answer. Yelled a few more times, he stopped. Then started shoulder ramming the door. I panicked and went to grab the phone, and a kitchen knife. But halfway to the kitchen, I heard a huge crash at the back end of the house. Meanwhile, the ramming was still happening at the front door. Heard someone scurrying through the back of the house swearing. Panicking, I didn't want to get caught in the middle of the house by 2 people. So decided to burst out through the front door and bowl over whoever was out there, knowing it was just one person, because I had seen him through the window. So that's what I did. Exploded out the front door, knocked the guy over and ran out into the street into a neighbor's, and called the police. They were gone by the time the police arrived. Incidentally, they came back twice the next week, and again when I wasn't home. The neighbors told me, ended up catching them, but definitely left a lasting fear in me. So I didn't witness the actual event, but the aftermath of it still haunts me. A while back I was an environmental technician for a huge industrial waste remediation company. We did a lot of work for the railroad companies. Every now and again we'd get a biohazard call for what they label as a trespasser strike. Usually it's an animal that has the misfortune to be passing by one of the speedliners. In this instance it was a person. At least that's what I was told. There was nothing left of them except blood, bone fragments, and goop that went for about a mile. Biggest problem was the rail lines were still electrified, so wherever their biomass hit the tracks it was fried on there. Think egg on a cast iron pan that never gets flipped and sits there for hours. I will always remember that smell. Even through my respirator. I worked in a kitchen for a couple summers, at a Cub Scout camp in the Midwest. I usually worked late nights, mainly watching the main building I was in, and watching over the people who had special needs, mainly in the form of people who took temperature-sensitive medication. I remember one night it was storming, and we were under a tornado watch. Protocol said we don't have to call the campers to the shelters unless a warning was issued, so to prevent unnecessary worry and concern. The counselor head gave me a radio and basically said, "Watch the radar, if a warning is issued, let me know, and we'll wake everyone else up." Around midnight, I was pleasantly shaken by the sound of Tom from the National Weather Service report that our county was now under a tornado warning, so I radioed the head and through a lot of curse words, I heard him say, "I'll wake the others, you get the lights on." 5 minutes later, all staff are now awake, and splitting into teams to begin waking campers, while I was tracking the movement of a funnel cloud on my phone's radar app. In typical leader fashion, he told me, "Grab an air horn, get in a golf cart, and go out. I'll take over here." So I did. Just as I was leaving, the first people from one of the closest campsites arrived, and the worst possible fucking news was brought to us. Little Timmy Tiger Scout had gotten scared and disappeared into the forest. Both parents were still searching, and the rest of the cub pack was pretty worried, so the head turns to me and says, "Don't worry, we've got a staff member going over there right now." As he looks right at me. So I left, and began making my way down there in my golf cart. I found the parents, still looking for their kid, but no kid, so after telling the father to come with me and both the father and myself telling the mother to go back, the two of us left to continue the search on the trails. We ended up finding the little fucker near the climbing tower. He had hidden at the base, and was lying flat down, so I'll give him props for trying to be safe. Still, we got him on the cart, and just as I turned us around, like a scene from Twister, a bolt of lightning illuminated the sky just in time for all three of us to see this large, dark fucking funnel past the trees. Now because the trails that led back to the main building also led straight to God's finger, I turned us around and began driving towards a couple lodges that I knew were nearby. Next to the climbing tower was the High Adventures course, and about 500 feet past that was 2 lodges that were only ever used during the winter, so I drove us over there. We broke our way in, and sat there until the lights above us stopped shaking. Afterwards, our golf cart survived, so we used it to drive back, got into the main building, and as the family was reunited, I promptly told the head he could go fuck himself, got my shit together, and left in my truck that morning, the rain still falling, and the branches still all over the road. Hell hath no fury like Mother Nature. When I was 12, my family and I took a road trip to Florida, and as my mom was driving through Ocala, I saw a store with police tape around the gas pumps and a car with a limp body laying halfway out of the open driver's store door and a pool of blood on the ground in front of him. It looked like, and probably was, a murder scene, and nobody else in the car seemed to notice it. I never mentioned it to any of them, I just stayed quiet and tried to forget what I just saw. It still haunts me. More recently, I saw a man try to ride his bike through an automatic gate before it shut, and he didn't make it. He slammed into the gate, and one of the spikes impaled him through the neck. This was at one of my job sites, landscaping, a condo complex, and my coworker gave him a towel to hold over his gaping neck wound. The man was still conscious and standing. We called 911 and an ambulance took him to the hospital. About a week later, we were back at that location and the man approached me in good spirits. He was thankful that we helped him out, and I was glad to see he was okay. Apparently, the spike missed a major artery by a hair. Finally, when I was 9, my brother and I were walking around Daytona Beach with a friend, barefoot on beach side in the bad part of town. Our friend thought it would be a good idea to pick up a stick and poke a homeless man who was sleeping behind a hedgerow in a parking lot, and when the man didn't respond, he continued to poke him. Finally, the man had enough, grabbed a gun from under his sleeping bag and pointed it at us. He told us to get our asses away from his bush, and we ran like hell. In retrospect, it was more sad than scary, and we totally deserved the scare. He just wanted to be left alone, and good on him for having protection. I only learned years later how many homeless people are beaten to death by sick young punks. Damn. Apparently I have a couple of them and I can't really decide. When my second nephew was born, my brother lived in a house that smelled so strongly of mold. I told him it made my eyes burn when I walked in. My then sister-in-law for some reason had always dreamt of living in that house because her older brother had. I did everything I could to clean it before the baby came. It was in an old town and it was the town doctor's house from like the early 1900s. They got tired of me bitching once he was born and I wasn't allowed back. My mom died, and a few weeks later I got a call that he was about to die too. Went to the hospital and he was covered in mold. Seriously. Mold. I held him in my arms while he was screaming and he just smelled like the same mold in that house. I had a moldy baby in my arms that I helped deliver a few weeks earlier, and every time he threw up on me I almost threw up too. He got transferred to an intensive care unit about an hour away, and at night they would go out to the bars and get drunk and leave him alone. I take back my previous entries, this was the most terrifying. I fucking hate them for being such irresponsible asshole parents that should have never had a child. I cut all ties with everyone directly after that. He lived and I'm so glad. He has no idea who I am. Thanksgiving Day 2010, I was 17, my parents woke me up without warning kind of early and my mom was sobbing. My dad tells me my 21-year-old sister had some sort of mental breakdown at college and that they were going to pick her up. She had been taken in by the state police. They found her wandering in some field off the highway totally incoherent, but she had managed to call 911. My dad only talked to me for a few minutes before they left and didn't return until much later. I'm not sure what was more messed up, seeing her completely off her rocker and having to talk my only sibling down from escaping my parents' house, or all the stuff that could have happened to her. She was talking about having visions of God speaking to her directly and was talking about people who weren't real. It was traumatizing AF. I have so much respect for her to go back and finish her BA after something so life-altering. I also lost all respect for her classmates and friends that wouldn't help her and turn their backs on her after her episode. She ended up in the psych ward for almost 2 months and has struggled with her mental health ever since. She just went back into a psych ward yesterday for the first time in a few years, but I have hope she'll bounce back pretty fast this time. This whole ordeal and the things she's gone through have totally changed my view on mental health and the stigma with it. It has affected me so much that the horror novel I'm outlining is basically going to serve as a metaphor for the narrative of mental health over the past century and how we need be more receptive and address the way anyone with mental health issues is treated. I was 13 spending the night at my neighborhood friend's house. Her bed was up against the wall below the window, which was near this big tree we used to climb during the summer. It was about 2 in the morning and after some late night giggles we started drifting off to sleep. We woke up to a huge bang which shook the window and the bed frame. We looked outside and started screaming. Someone had crashed their car into the tree. It was super dark out so I couldn't see anything but the car wrapped around the tree. Her parents came in and we had to go sleep in the living room. I couldn't sleep. The next morning my adopted mom calls and tells me to come home. Turns out the person who crashed was my brother. I guess my adopted brother confessed his love to one of his close guy friends, got rejected, got drunk and tried to kill himself by crashing into that tree. He turned out okay thankfully, but the thought of I could have heard my brother's death stuck with me. Around 16 my other adopted brother, A, started hearing voices. He was convinced people were under the house planning to kill him. It started off with him putting his ear to the floor and asking me and my other siblings if we could hear them and to record it. Me being young I recorded it for him, but it was just silence. He kept asking me to rewind the video over and over, asking me if I heard it too. My other brother, Jay, told my adopted mom, but she shrugged it off. It went on like this for about 2 days. I knew it was bad, but nothing prepared me for what was about to happen. One night I saw A frantically packing his bags and asked where he was going. He replied his friend, K, was there to pick him up. Well, K was actually out of state with her family. I woke my mom up and we found A sitting in my other brother, P.'s car in the passenger seat with a pile of clothes in his lap, just staring out the windshield with his mouth open. My mom tried to convince him that K was out of state and that he was in P.'s car, and it took us about an hour to get him inside. He seemed okay until the next night. He ended up taking all the knives from the kitchen and lining them up in the bathroom before running out the door. I ran after him barefoot, but he was too fast. I remember crying in the middle of the street. I remember yelling at my mom to help him because she was just standing there doing nothing. Apparently he was jumping the neighbors' fences and running in people's backyards. I went back inside and collapsed on my bed sobbing. I remember my mom on the phone with the police begging them not to shoot him. I remember sobbing even harder, thinking my brother was going to die, begging whatever holy that they wouldn't kill my brother. He ended up going to an inpatient psych where they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. He's on medication that helps and he's doing good now. He doesn't remember anything that happened, but I do. I had a really fucked up childhood and I could go on about all the messed up things I've seen, from growing up with an addict mom, to foster care, etc., but I am healing from all my traumas now. I'm in therapy and finally found medication that works for my BPD and PTSD. Mental illness is no joke. Mental illness can be terrifying.